listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your resource to better understand and execute successful podcast ad campaigns. Hello and welcome to the Podcast Advertising Playbook. I'm your host, Heather Osgood, and I am joined today by Lex Friedman of Lex Friedman Consulting. Lex, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to see you.
So you and I have had the pleasure of working together now for, I think, about a year and a half. Yeah, through some consulting at True Native. And I know that you have been a huge help to us. You also have been in the podcast space for a really long time. And you were a guest on the show not too long ago. But for folks who are unfamiliar with you or your work, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I appreciate it. So the short version of my origin story in podcasting is I was a co-founder at a company called Midroll, and I was our chief revenue officer there, so responsible for all the shows we would sign and all the ads we would sell. And eventually we were acquired by EW Scripps, and I was there a total of 7 years. And I left before the second time that company was acquired by SiriusXM, and I went over to ART19, which was a technology company in podcasting. And I was there as its CRO to introduce things like ad sales and original shows to a company that had been focused on tech. And a couple of years into my time at ART19, we were acquired by Amazon. And Amazon had already acquired Wondery, so I moved over to the Wondery team as its head of strategy, and I was there for about a year and a half. And just over 2 years ago, I launched this consultancy because I'm definitely more of a startup person than I am a big company person. And this way I get to work with lots of different podcast startups at different stages and have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious, I don't think I've ever asked you, did you have more fun working on the content side or on the technology side?
It's a great question. So definitely have aspects of both that appeal to me a whole lot. And I think that, honestly, the reason I didn't stay longer at Amazon than I did was because Amazon really wanted you to do one thing or the other. And I think I'm happiest when I get to do lots of things. And so what was fun about building Midroll and then helping to build ART19 was having to wear all the hats all the time, because I think that's where I get most excited, when I can focus on one thing one day and another thing the next.
Yeah. No, I think that makes total sense. And I think when you're in that startup mindset, you have to be able to focus on lots of different things, because if you can't, then you don't move the ball down the court, because it takes a lot of effort in lots of different places to build something. So
100%.
Yeah. So fascinating. I love talking to you both in our personal work together, but also just in the broader kind of scope of the industry, because you do talk to so many different companies. And of course, we're not going to be sharing any insider secrets or anything, but you've got such good perspectives. I'm sure that you hear people say the same thing in different ways over and over. And so as I was thinking about putting together kind of my 2025 trend report, like everyone else in the industry is doing, I thought, how can I make this maybe a little bit different than I've done in years past? And I thought it would be really fun to have you come on the show, because you have a different take, because you've got an inside picture into a lot of different kind of areas for the industry. So I guess I'm curious, as you think about 2025, are there any kind of like top trends that you're seeing that you think everyone should be aware of or looking out for?
The easiest answer here is video, which I think was probably also the answer a year ago when people were having this conversation, and maybe even some of the year before that. And what I think is my prediction, or looking ahead for this year, 2025 in video, is for people not to get all consumed by it in podcasting. Because I think we talk a lot about podcast movement because it's one of the big events in our industry. And it's, in many ways, it's focused on more like beginners and more prosumers in podcasting, but also every major company in podcasting goes, and they all go because they all go. And it's a great place to network and meet and to interact with all your peers at all these other companies. With video podcasting, it's definitely not an emperor has no clothes situation, but everybody's talking about video because everybody's talking about video. And I certainly think we'll see more innovation and more shows releasing in video formats. And obviously Spotify's making a big play in that area right now. But I think it's probably really important not to get all consumed by it, because I do think that video and audio podcasts are different things, and it's okay if you specialize in just the one. And I absolutely believe in meeting listeners where they are. And if you have fans or potential fans who are going to only listen if your content's on YouTube or has a video equivalent on Spotify, I get wanting to focus on that. But if your show is already successful, it's not going to suddenly get worse because it doesn't have a video component or a YouTube component. So I think we're going to see a whole lot of video, and I'm hopeful that we won't see too many people losing their minds on the video front, because I think it's easy to go a little crazy there with maybe limited return.
Yeah. I am so glad that you said that because we are in 100% agreement on that. And what I did this year that I haven't done before is I was able to have a team member compile a list of all of these different trends and prediction reports. And over the holiday break, I actually put them in my Speechify app, which has been pretty fun, and listened to all of them because, audio and all that. But I probably listened to about 50 different predictions, and I was kind of strikingly shocked at how little real content I felt like there was there. And every other person was saying video, 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 video. And I've been saying video too because everybody is saying video. But I was listening to the New Media Show, and they used the kind of analogy, not the analogy, but the comparison that I thought was so good of YouTube and Spotify. And I don't exactly know why Spotify is pushing video so heavily. I mean, yes, I think they would like to compete with YouTube. And I think oftentimes in our minds, because Spotify feels like this massive company in the podcast space and they've done so much. And hey, I don't want to say that they're not a big company, they are. But when you compare Spotify to YouTube, it's almost comical in terms of the size difference. And as you said, I think that we don't want to say video isn't happening because it's obviously happening, but it isn't happening in the way that everyone is making it sound like it's happening, especially not when it comes to Spotify, right? Because Spotify has so few. I mean, I think that they have like 270,000 videos or something on their platform compared to like however many millions of videos are on YouTube. And so making that comparison, it's just really not a comparison. And I saw a post, must have been on LinkedIn, where, this woman said, hey, you don't have to do video to be a podcaster. And I love what you just said because it's true. If you've got a really good audio podcast, it's not suddenly going to become bad because you don't have video. And I think we're all just so worried that we have to create these amazing video podcasts now in order to be an entity within the space. And I just don't think that's true.
And when you look at some of the biggest podcasts, and Joe Rogan is a notable exception, but if you put Joe Rogan to the side and look at some of the other big podcasts, none of them have a significant video component. Some of them will put like their screen art up and have the audio there on YouTube. But if you look at the numbers for Smartless on YouTube, it's a few thousand views per YouTube episode, but we know the show's doing millions of audio downloads. We have friends and people who I trust and respect who work at some of these companies in our space that do a lot of study and analysis of the industry. But I still really struggle to believe, maybe I'm just clinging to the past, but I really don't think so. I struggle to believe that the majority of podcast consumption is happening on YouTube. I remember 5, 6, 7 years ago, we would occasionally see studies that said more listening was happening on Spotify than anywhere else. But nobody's numbers back that up, right? You looked at your stats from your hosting provider, you would see Apple is number 1 and Spotify is number 2 or number 3. And I think the delta there came a lot from how the data was gathered. And if we're relying on survey data, sure, Spotify and YouTube are really popular. So it wasn't surprising to me 5 years ago that people said, oh, I'm doing most of my listening on Spotify because they were listening to music on Spotify. So answering the survey, they could get it wrong or misunderstand the question or just misrepresent how much they listen to podcasts on Spotify. And I think now we're seeing people mention YouTube a lot because a lot of us do spend a lot of time on YouTube, but we're consuming things that are from different kinds of content creators, but that aren't necessarily podcasts. And to me, this is not about what the definition is of what a podcast is and isn't.
Agreed.
It's just really, how are people using this? And we also say in most advertising decks that I see about podcasting, about how much of the listening is happening with people who are doing something else at the same time, right? They're commuting or they're doing chores, and you can't drive a car while watching YouTube. And listen, I have tried to like do the dishes while I'm watching YouTube, but you're either doing one or the other. You can't really do both. But listening to podcasts is the thing that you can do. So I do think it's a I was going to say a little overblown. I don't. I think it's a lot overblown. I think people are more honestly panicky about video than they have to be, because obviously audio podcasting is a viable and successful industry and a thing that you can make money in and be successful in. If video excites you, then absolutely do it. But what I really worry about is people shortchanging their creativity because they feel like they have to have a video component. You might not be able to get certain guests if you require that they be on video. You might not be able to make the kinds of episodes you want if you're using video, because a lot of podcasts are edited and you don't want your video to be that choppy. So I just hope that people recognize that they, like you said, you can still have a great and successful podcast, even if it's audio only, and you can look at video or have a video version without losing your mind. It's also worth noting that Google has said pretty explicitly, there are various services out there that can take your audio podcast and make a video version for you, either with waveforms or transcriptions or like AI generated imagery or video. Google has been pretty adamant that if you're just going to show non-live video for your podcast, there's no real difference between just showing the key art or showing waveforms or showing some transcripts at the same time, because people are either entranced by the video or they're not. They're either watching it or they're not. If you don't have something that's actually really meaningful visually, then people are just listening anyway. So I think it's very okay, I think, to say, I'm just going to put this video out there in this way, and here's my key art, and I've spent the least amount of time necessary to make a quality product to put on YouTube.
Yeah, for sure. I love everything you just said. I think one of the things I struggle with so much is, as much as I want to like YouTube and watch YouTube, and obviously hundreds of millions, if not billions, probably of people love it, I don't personally have time to watch YouTube. I listen to probably a book or two a week. I listen to 5 or 6 podcasts a week, but I do that because I listen while I'm doing other things. I don't have the ability to watch video. And I love audio so much that I get frustrated that we're pushing it toward video, because I just want to say, these are totally different things, guys. Like, do we not see that these are different? And the power of podcasting, the power of the theater of the mind, the impact, the power of the engaged audience, like all of these things come when we are doing audio. They don't necessarily come when we're doing video too. Now, hello, is there a place for video? Of course. We know there's a place for video, right? That's like saying, is anyone on social media? Of course they're on social media. And I want to make sure that as an audio industry that we are advocating for audio, and that we're not just jumping on, hey, let's just totally take this medium and make it something else.
It reminds me of the start of podcasting, right? Initially, we were excited as this industry got built that we were suddenly players in media in different ways, right? Like early days when Conan O'Brien launched a podcast, or Bill Simmons launched his own independent podcast, or shows went from being kind of very, very homegrown to being big, significant deals. That was exciting. We went from being innovators in tech and in audio to now like being part of a media industry. It is not surprising, but I will say maybe even a little bit disappointing to me to look at this turn to be, we kind of want to be video. We kind of want to be TV. I remember in the 80s, maybe 90s, there was, you would see film stars in movies, but you wouldn't see them on TV. Like TV was like the step.
Right.
And that
Yes.
changed. Right now it's like TV can be very prestigious, and audio can be prestigious too. I think there's this desire to be TV or to be video or YouTube because it's shiny a different way. And also it attracts a different kind of talent. It especially attracts very attractive talent for understandable reasons. But I think it's okay to love the space you're in. And again, like you said, we don't have to ignore video, but it's okay that we're a different thing. And I don't think that certainly the evolution in history was first there was radio and then there was TV. And I get that can happen, but we already had video. Podcasts were the innovation here. And to kind of go back in a circle is, I think, ignoring part of what drove podcast growth. Because like you said, it is the work that you can do in your mind to enhance the experience. And it's also the way that we've got plenty of time. Many people find, like you said, hundreds of millions find plenty of time to watch video, whether it's YouTube or elsewhere. We're filling all those gaps where you can't do that with podcasts. Like you, I don't listen to books, but I do listen to so many podcasts a week. And sometimes it's in minutes at a time. Like when I'm putting on my shoes before I work out, I have like 3 minutes of podcast listening time then. And That doesn't work for watching video. That's an annoying way to watch video, but it absolutely works for me to have bits and pieces of podcasts if that means I can consume more. So
Yeah.
I don't think we've heard the last of people talking about it, but I'm hopeful that this will be a year of the good kind of reckoning, of recognizing that it's okay if not every show is video.
Absolutely. And I am all for the idea of a content creator. I think that many advertisers are moving more toward content creators. They want to buy the podcast, the video, the social, the newsletter, all of the bells and whistles. And I'm here for that. I think it's a great way to strategize from an advertising perspective. I think, as you mentioned, if you can do video well, let's do video well, right? There is definitely a place for it. I'm not saying there isn't. I just don't like the idea of let's convert podcasts to video. I believe they are separate things and I think they should stay separate things. And I think that they personally, I think they will continue to be separate things. And I do think that you will have really amazing podcasters that are just audio podcasters. And then you'll have people who can do audio and video well together, but it doesn't mean that everybody has to do audio and video well together.
100% agreed. And I really think you nailed it when you talked about creators and how advertisers are looking at creators. Like the shift that I really see for 2025 is we're going to see more creator-based stuff. You know, there's been an evolution in podcast ad buying where initially all these networks that grew, including ours mutually, have been focused on let's acquire more and more shows so we can sell host-read ads against them. And at the biggest networks, they then found, well, boy, it's hard to scale selling host-read ads if we've signed 200, 300, 500 shows. So then there's been a big push into programmatic. But programmatic ads, they often have to charge less for and can often be a little bit less impactful or effective than host-read ads. And so as networks have really prioritized, hey, we want to sell host-read ads on our biggest shows, and we're going to not neglect, they wouldn't use that word at least, but we're going to only put the rest of our shows in this programmatic pile. I think now you're seeing some of those large networks realize those ads are less effective both from a revenue perspective and from the advertiser's perspective. So I'm seeing some growth in 2025 in what other holistic buys can we do? Like what can we sell where it's not just these hosts reading this ad on this show, but it's also, like you said, it's their socials? Or can we do more custom ad integrations where there's a segment or key art on our, like their logo on our key art, and those kind of more full brand integrations, which I think is nice in that it's getting back to some of the roots of what made podcasting successful. And it's also, I hope, a way for shows to make more money and advertisers to find more success. So my expectation is we'll see more of those heavier custom lifts in this year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I definitely have seen a demand for that. And so I am really excited. I know that at True Native, that's something that we're going to be leaning into for this upcoming year is how do we create more customized packages across all of the content outlets and not just the podcast. And so I am really excited to see where that goes. So we'll see. We'll see. One of the things that I thought was really missing from most of the projections was AI. Of course, there were the technology companies that were like, AI is going to be the future of everything. But I was surprised how few people commented on it. And it feels like it's been such a kind of frenzied conversation in 2024 that I was surprised to see that kind of almost missing. What are your thoughts about AI and what we might see from it in the upcoming year?
To me, it feels like one of the fastest tech advances / adoptions of our lifetime. So it doesn't surprise me that people would have missed it as a prediction last year. I use AI with podcasts with some of my clients today. There are times where, you know, I have one client who makes podcasts on a subject matter I do not understand at all. I don't have to. It's a very niche show. But I have told them that, like, I can't write these episode descriptions for you or titles, but I can feed a transcript. I can use AI to generate the transcript in seconds. Then I could feed that transcript into another thing and have it write some suggested titles and descriptions, and you can tell me which ones work the best because I don't know what you guys are talking about. And that's been hugely helpful. It's a major time saver. So that kind of AI, you could very easily see the major hosting companies start to build in some of that, right? Like certainly to automate transcriptions and maybe to suggest tags or where your ad insertion points should go or titles and descriptions. That feels very, very doable. What I'm far less eager about is, and I don't know if you've heard any of, Google has 2 different products that do this, but where they can create an entire synthesized podcast. Like you feed it an article and it can make a podcast that sounds disturbingly human with 2 co-hosts talking about a topic. I have clients who are working on fully AI generated shows. I know that my former employer, Wondery, has experimented with an AI host for some shows. You talked before about kind of the intimacy of podcasting and what makes it work. I don't think that we can develop the same kind of trusting relationships with fake hosts who we know are
Mm.
fake. I know there's a lot of excitement, and I felt some of it, about how can AI help with the ad side, especially. If you have a really famous host who's going to read an ad and misspeaks one word, instead of asking that host to re-record the ad, which could be a nightmare, can you just use AI to tweak that one word? Or if the host has recorded this ad for their show, but we want to use it as a pre-produced spot on 50 other shows, can we just swap out the promo code without asking the host to do it all?
Mm.
Now, the more famous you are, the less likely you are to say yes to letting anything mess with your voice in those ways. But things like that do feel really helpful. Certainly, even tools like Descript and Riverside can pull out your stammers and the normal ways that people talk and make them sound a little bit more erudite, if that's the right word. AI can feel free to correct me if I'm not. But those things where it's like the cleanup, the polish layer, I think sounds really exciting. The stuff where it's like creating the content for you, making the show, I am not excited about. But I mean, I think that AI is already a significantly increasing part of many people's workflow. It's interesting because at some of the biggest companies, they often start with like blanket bans on using tools like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. And already just in the past couple of months, I've had friends at some of those large companies tell me, oh no, now we're allowed to use them. Like we have a special account that we're supposed to use for doing this. So, I mean, I think podcasters, especially when podcasters are more independent, not using AI feels like doing this with a hand tied behind your back, because at
Mhm.
least simplifying this, like no podcast should publish today without a transcription. It's hilariously easy to have a transcription ready to go instantly. And once you have a transcription, you can do a whole lot. You can create show notes kind of automatically. And so that kind of thing I think is very exciting. And like I said, I do imagine that some of these hosting providers are looking at how they can integrate some of these tools into that process. But I think it's really important, not just in podcasting, but including in podcasting, that we not lose sight of the importance of humanity as a key
Right.
aspect.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. I totally agree. And I think what I've been hearing, which is what you have essentially just said, is the best thing about AI is using it to do those things where I need you to filter through this information and summarize it. I need you to take this and write, like that tagline, or those are the types of things that it just does so incredibly well and saves so much time. And really, it's even just this, it's like having it create a starting place for you that you can then edit down from. I think it's really helpful. And
Yes.
I don't personally think we're going to have as much of those AI generated voice podcasts as we're all kind of afraid of. I also think that, you know, it's one of those things where if I want to have AI read me the encyclopedia, I can. And I don't care that it's reading me the encyclopedia. I'm just looking for knowledge, right? And if I'm just looking for knowledge, I don't have to have somebody famous telling me about this. I can get it from whomever, right?
Right.
It's when we're looking for personality, it's when we're looking for connection, it's when we're looking to feel like we're part of the human race and all of that, right? Those are the times then we're looking to connect with others. And that's the power of podcasting in many ways, right? But there are also podcasts out there that are just informative and they're just giving you information. If I just need to listen to a gardening podcast about how to make my bulbs bloom better, I don't necessarily care if it's from Martha Stewart or from the encyclopedia, right? I'm okay getting that information from essentially a robot. So yeah, so we'll see how that unfolds.
There's a tricky part of what you just said too, because I agree with you, but I don't know exactly the best approach to advertising on the robot version of that show, because
Mm,
I don't obviously I don't trust the robot's endorsement, right? I don't trust the robot's personal
sure.
experience, doesn't have any. So that means on a robot-led show, you either have a robot reading ads, which I don't know what that means to me as a listener. Like I don't know how much weight it carries. I'm thinking of my sister, who is a big Claude devotee, one of Google's AI tools, and she talks about Claude as a true friend. So it's quite possible if Claude recommended a product, it would work just fine for my sister.
That's
But
funny.
and maybe that will continue to happen, honestly, because like I think all of us have emotional relationships with, I don't want to say all of them triggers people's things, but with Apple's assistant, with Amazon's assistant, and sometimes those are negative ones because those can be frustrating interfaces to interact with. But I do wonder do you rely on pre-produced and programmatic spots on a show that is, like you said, if it's objective content and it can be provided by a robot, how does advertising on that show really work in a way that
Hmm.
remains effective? But
Hmm.
it might not need to make that as much money as a host-driven show if there's no host to pay.
Exactly. Exactly. And then to me, that's where programmatic ads come into play, right? So it's like, hey, we've got these impressions. Let's put an ad in there and see. And yeah, I don't think host read ads from a robot makes sense, but I think a programmatic ad would. So I don't know. Have to see how it goes.
There are times when you can just sort of marvel at the times we live in, right? Like it's pretty remarkable how fast some of these things have happened and how it works. The entire industry we work in couldn't have existed when we were growing up. And now the technology advancements that exist just since we were already in this industry are shocking. So I do like to marvel at it.
I know, I know. And I think that sometimes we should take a minute and just take a look at where we're really at from a technology perspective because it has advanced so much in the last 30 years. It's pretty crazy.
Yes.
So, yeah. Well, so as we think about these kind of advancements or predictions that we have, what do you think in terms of kind of that balance between content creator and technology is as we think about approaching the next year? I mean, obviously, I'm in the advertising space. We're here to talk about advertising, but technology and content creation go hand in hand with that, right? If we don't have solid content, we don't have solid technology advancements, we're not going to be able to create solid campaigns. So what are your thoughts? Like, is there a balance or is one going to outshine the other in terms of value or importance?
I think and recognizing that you and I both come from the revenue side of things, I think the content's the most important piece. I think
Hmm.
if it's great content, you can find partners who want to monetize it with it, and you can find successful ways to monetize it if it's great content. I think there are some, and I'm reminded of I think it's a Bill Gates quote when he says like 64 kilobytes of memory ought to be enough for anybody. And that was in the early 80s. And it's okay to be wrong sometimes, but I do think that there are very difficult to surmount, maybe impossible to surmount challenges in how targeted audio ads can be with technology. Certainly, to target a show based on, if it's a parenting show and knowing that there's going to be parents listening and we should target advertisers who want to reach those same listeners, that makes sense. But the technology that all the major players in the space use for audience targeting is limited, and it's limited by design based on especially Apple, but really how all these companies have approached podcasting since, not to get too nerdy on it, but right, you get the IP address and the user agent. That's all that server can use to target ads. There's no device ID. There's no cookies when you're downloading a podcast from a podcast app because you're not in a web browser. So it only knows you're using, this podcast app and you're on this kind of a device and this is your IP address. So that has a bunch of information, but it's also missing a bunch of information.
Hmm.
I'm in a house with 5 people, including me. And so when those companies, when Nielsen or Claritas or anybody else tries to use my user agent information to target me, it could be targeting me as a 44-year-old woman or as a 44-year-old man or as an 18-year-old kid.
Hmm.
And that kid would want me to say adult, but either way, like it's useful, but it is going to be at best household level targeting. And since so many of us, almost all of us, are downloading these shows on our phones, and sometimes that show is getting downloaded while you're commuting or while you're out of the home, now it's got a potentially changing IP address because it's whatever your cell phone company's IP address is that's assigned to your device at that time. So they know you're on an iPhone, and they know what app you're using again, and they know a temporary IP address, so they know where you are, but they don't know a ton about you. I don't think that's going to change because that's how podcasts are downloaded, and I think that's going to be a permanent limitation. Listen, I appreciate what programmatic ads bring to the space, and I think that programmatic ads can be and have been successful for advertisers. And when the ads sound good enough, they're not too annoying to listeners.
Hmm.
But I think that knowing that we're going to have to rely on what the content is to really figure out how to target, like basically relying on category targeting more than anything else, is probably the smartest move we have. So I think, to your initial question, I think the content is what really is going to matter because the better the content is, the easier it is to find the right advertisers, find the right match, and make money for the show and provide a service to the advertisers. But it's not that I'm pessimistic about where the technology is going on ad targeting. It's just that I think that we've likely maxed out
Hmm.
because unless listeners willingly and eagerly agree to forfeit all of their privacy, then we're limited in what we can ever know about them. And I think that's been working fine. Honestly, another huge industry that has the same challenge is streaming video. You're streaming video. If you're logged into your Hulu account and you've got Hulu with ads, Hulu knows some things about you, but it knows some things about you, the person who signed up for Hulu. Like you said, here's my zip code and here's my name and gender, whatever. But if my kid's watching and getting ads from Hulu, they're getting at best things that are targeted for me. They have the same challenge there, and it's still pretty vibrant. You can sell a whole lot of ads for those streaming TV services. So I am grateful that I feel like the industry has moved beyond that so frequently used criticism of years back of that podcasting was the Wild West. I don't think we hear that so much anymore. I don't think it was the Wild West, and I certainly don't think it is the Wild West now. But I think that the complaints you get now are people who don't like the way it is, but it is the way it is. Like, we have to rely on downloads. We have to rely on the ways we can target and the ways we can't tell you if the ad was heard or not because we don't have that technology. And that's the way podcasting works. But I think that there has been a slow emphasis on slow acceptance of the reality of the industry and how the technology works. And so the advancements really have to just come, as I think they have been, from just more and better shows. It's amazing to listen to the shows that were popular 10 years ago and what's popular now and how much better everything is. Like, people know more about what makes a good podcast and how to sound right and how to edit well and how to present things in ways that work. And so I'm excited for that development. I listen to more and more shows every year. You always think you're maxed out on how many shows you can have in your podcast app, and I keep on adding.
Yeah, for sure. I'm always so shocked at how high a level of production there are on so many podcasts, even just independently produced shows, where I'm like, man, they're just doing a really good job producing this podcast. And it's just somebody in their basement, right? Or, somebody that's got a mic and interviewing people. And so it is pretty fascinating. And I am really interested to hear what happens, because it was funny as I was listening to these predictions. One prediction said season shows are going out. Nobody likes season shows. They're difficult to monetize, which, by the way, they are difficult to monetize. The seasonal shows are out. And then, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 predictions later, it was like season shows are the best. Like, they're so much easier to produce. There's like an endpoint, all of this, right? And so I think that content, just like everything else, will continue to evolve. What I'm really interested in from a content perspective is that I feel like TikTok, Reels, Shorts, all of those, like, have just killed our attention span. And one of the things that I love the most about podcasts is that time spent listening is so much greater on podcasts than it is with other, mediums. And I just think, to me, that's really, really important. And I don't think that we emphasize that enough. I personally hate short podcasts. I don't want to listen to a 3-minute podcast. I would rather listen to, like, for me, like 20 to 30 minutes is like the shortest show that I will ever listen to. If it's shorter than that, it's not even going to make it in my lineup. If it's an hour, I like it a lot. If it's 2 hours, I'm okay with it. But I'm curious, do you have any perspectives on, like, the length of podcasts?
It's good because otherwise we were going to agree on everything. On this one, I don't agree with you. I think as a rule, podcasts are getting too long. And I think that many podcasts get longer over time if they're, especially talk shows, because they get more used to just talking and it gets easier and easier. And so they keep going. It gets assigned to a lot of people. I think of it as a Mark Twain quote. I'm sorry for the length of this letter. If I had more time, it would have been shorter. I do think there's something to be said for shorter shows. I listen to probably 1.5, 1.6x.
Me too.
Not because it's not that I want to get it over with. It's that I want to be able to listen to as many things as possible.
And our brains can listen that fast, so we might as well.
Once you train yourself to do it, 100%. My kids always think that it sounds crazy, but I'm like, you just don't listen to the whole show. If you listen to the show like this, you would get very used to it. But I host a ridiculous daily podcast called Your Daily Lex. It's not 100% daily, but it's many days a week, and that's 4 or 5 minutes, and it's nonsense. But in general, I agree with you. If it's something that's too quick, I'm not interested. But I don't mind a 20 or 30-minute show. I love when a show finishes, and I wish that there were more, because that's something good. When I think, especially if it's a newer show starting out, and you want to get listeners to subscribe or follow, if you look at a brand new show and you see, hey, there's you're 8 episodes behind already, because most podcast listeners are completionists, and they're all 2 hours long. That's a big commitment. Now you're dedicating a minimum of 16 hours to just getting caught up, and then it's 2 hours every week or whatever. I think that can be hard. So I think I always said, when I had to wear my revenue hat, that the content should be as long as the show needs. Like, it shouldn't be dictated by the revenue side. But the downside to a 20-minute, even 30-minute show is it can hold, from a revenue perspective, is it can hold fewer ads. When a
Mhm.
show hits that 40-minute mark and I feel like, oh, I can put in 2 pre-rolls and 4 mid-rolls and 2 different breaks and whatever, like now that show's a lot more monetizable. There's a big difference between a 30-minute show and a 40-minute show in my mind from that ad load perspective. So from a revenue hack, I like a 40-minute show. Uh, Once it's longer than that, like once you get to the 2 hour mark, you could
Then it's
fit more
almost
ads
too
in there,
long from an
but I
ad
don't know how many people are
perspective.
listening. Exactly. How many people are
Exactly.
listening to your
Right.
fourth ad break?
Right.
But I really struggle when shows keep getting longer over time. So I
Hmm.
appreciate the shows that like do some of my favorite shows are probably around that 40-minute mark, 50-minute mark. And that works for me because then, especially when you're listening at a faster speed, it takes half an hour or so to
Yep.
listen to, and that works out
Yep.
great.
Yep. Yep. No, I do agree. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it'll be interesting. I think the hard part with podcasting is that we do always feel like we need an intro, we need to say hello, we need to say goodbye. And like with shorts, it's like you just, right? It's just like
Yep.
you just go from one to the next. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. We'll have to see where that goes.
When you see people who came from radio get into podcasting, um, I, I love Scott Aukerman, who's a comedian who has a show called Comedy Bang Bang, and he started as a radio guy, and he resets. He has a couple shows, and each one he sets what it is at the top of each show, and then after each break, he'll always say, here we are doing this thing. This American Life is a radio show, but they do the same thing where they reset it at the top of each segment, which is hilarious because if you're listening to the podcast, you know what you just listened to. It's an old school mindset, but I think there is. I rephrasing. I think that many podcasters forget to think about the fact that they can get new listeners. And when you jump into a show and it's confusing what's going on, or there's like in jokes or there's
Mm.
segments that you're not sure what they're talking about, that can also be problematic. Or especially if it's a multi-voice show, if you don't take a moment to specify this is this person talking and this is the other person talking, so I can now know who's who, it can be harder to jump into a show. So I think a little bit of that, like setting the stage, is helpful. But it is funny how you're right. TikToks, it feels like you're always jumping into the middle of the thing, and then it's in and it's out. And I I agree with you. It's shortening our attention spans. I think most YouTube videos, even the quote unquote longer ones, if I go to YouTube and I see a video is a half an hour long, there's no chance I'm going to
There's no
watch a half an hour
way.
video on
I
YouTube.
totally agree.
But I appreciate what you said about how podcasts reward not just attentive listening, but patient listening. Like even if you're
Mhm.
listening at a faster speed, they're taking the time to tell a story. And I think going back to our initial conversation on video, like that's part of what makes audio special. There's more of a tolerance. Our brains aren't trained the same way that we are when we're watching video now to just like get to the next thing, get to the next thing. We know what it's like to have a story told to us, and it's okay if that takes a little bit of time.
Yeah, yeah, I know for sure. I totally agree. And I will say I have listened to podcasts where I feel like I have like stepped into somebody's party and I wasn't invited and I'm like, who are these people and what are they doing here? And that's not good either, right? You have to
Yeah.
find a good balance there. So
Yeah.
I know we need to bring it to a close. So I'm curious, do you feel like there is a revenue kind of projection that you've seen that is a good number? Because I feel like I've seen 3 billion, I've seen 4 billion. I'm like, where exactly? I don't even really know for sure where we ended in 2024. I guess we'll have to wait a few months and see when that comes out. But any thoughts on where we might end from a revenue perspective?
I think I'm too chicken to give you a real number because it feels harder and harder to know. As from our whole conversation, what are we counting? Like,
Right.
is a YouTube only show that calls itself a podcast, is that included in that number? I do think it'll grow. I think, we talked about, many folks talked about 2023 is a tough year for some of the biggest companies, and 2024 was tougher for some of the smaller companies. And uh, I do think we're reaching a point now where, once again, advertisers have been pretty healthily reminded. We're post some of the annoyances like iOS 17's impacted download numbers and all those kerfuffles. But now that we're in a place where, once again, I think that people are really tough to reach. It's really hard to find consumers who aren't already skipping as many ads as possible, whether it's because they're watching streaming TV or they're listening to streaming music, and they're so good at tuning out ads. I am, like we talked about, I am feeling this resurgence in embracing host-read ads and embracing other kinds of custom ad elements, because the whole goal is, how can we keep attention? How can we make these ads as effective as
Yeah.
possible? So I am pretty optimistic that 2025 will be a healthy year for podcast revenue. But in terms of a number, I don't know, 3 billion, 4 billion, somewhere in there sounds good. But at
Agreed.
that point, the numbers seem so crazy to me. I have no idea.
I agree. I agree. Well, and I think it's going to be so interesting just from an economics perspective to see how 2025 is. I'm trying not to hold my breath, but I do think the economy plays a big role in advertising. So we'll just see what happens because it's going to be a surprise to all of us, I think. So
That's living.
it is, especially in today's ever-changing environment, right?
That's right.
Well, Lex, thank you so much for being on the show today. If people want to connect with you, where is a good place for them to find you?
Just lexfriedman.com. And the downside to Googling me is there's another person in podcasting with almost the same name. So mine is spelled like Fried, Friedman. That's me.
Nice. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope that you have enjoyed it, and I hope it gives you some insights into what might happen in 2025. As we have mentioned, none of us truly know, but we do know that podcasts are a really wonderful medium. They are definitely here to stay and ideally increase in revenue in this upcoming year. So thanks for listening, and we will catch you again next time. Thank you for listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your source to a better understanding of the podcast advertising industry.